Hello. We are announcing a brand new giveaway for 75,000 subscribers. All you have to do is obviously follow me. We are giving away one lightsaber from Art Sabers. They are sponsoring this giveaway, so what you have to do is go to the pinned comment down below, follow Art Sabers on Instagram, like their image, and tag 2 of your friends, and you will be entered into our giveaway. We will be doing this giveaway until we hit 75,000 subscribers here on PPSW. Thank you again for your continuous support.
Our story begins in 12AB with the son of Anakin Skywalker as he learns how to navigate the rarer aspects of the Force. Upon his studies, he becomes enthralled with the world between worlds.
Grandmaster Luke Skywalker found himself on Assus, where his new Jedi Academy was built. He had a temple built, and yet there hadn't been any students. Luke had been spending his time searching for the secrets of the Force, journeying into the galaxy to find out what kind of information he could discover about the Force and the Jedi before him. It had been a couple years since his original student of his academy left. While Luke was trying to embrace the way of the Jedi, he made a conscious effort to move away from some of the more categorically wrong issues the Jedi had. One of these issues was attachments. While Luke was working on holding the Order true to what it had been before his time, he gave Grogu the chance to keep his attachments, and he also gave Grogu the chance to stay and become a Jedi. The child chose the Mandalorian, and Luke respected the decision, something the former Jedi Order wouldn't have done. Luke's ability to take that step forward was crucial, but during this time he was still trying to understand everything about the Jedi. There were dozens of temples scattered across the galaxy. Luke had been to the rubble of what was once Jedha City. Luke didn't know much about Jedha City other than the fact that shortly before he joined the rebellion, the first Death Star obliterated the planet. Luke at this point was a bit of a loner. While he kept close in contact with his friends, he was rebuilding the Jedi Order. He believed that as a Jedi, like his father before him, he had a responsibility. Luke's attachments to Leia, Han, Chewie, and Lando were all incredibly important to him though. During this time, Luke was out on a planet of Tython. He had recently talked to his sister regarding her and Han's thoughts about training Ben Solo. The boys showed the same type of strength in the Force that was ever so prevalent in the line of Skywalker. While Leia had high hopes for Ben's training, it was Han who wasn't exactly with the idea of training Ben. To that extent, Luke understood. Han believed in the Force, now he had seen it and everything it was capable of, but he wasn't entirely on board with sending his son off to Luke's academy. Han was a loving person, he just never had the best way of showing it. That of course was no thanks to his first love in Qi'ra. Han was working on healthily showing his affection to his son and didn't really want to give him away to Luke, which was of course completely fair. While Luke was on Tython, he learned of something the Jedi had been looking for. Luke was fully aware of the world between worlds because of Ahsoka, but he was totally unsure of how to access it. The way Ahsoka explained it made sense, but also didn't make any sense, and it seemed as if the Jedi from the era of the Old Republic were trying to understand these same concepts. There was so much raw power in the Force that couldn't be obtained because it had to be earned. Luke was also very aware that someone by the name of Ezra Bridger had discovered the entrance to the world between worlds, but again, Ahsoka wasn't exactly sure on how to access it. She was saved because of Ezra and the power of the world between worlds. Luke was hopeful that he could use the world between worlds to save his father. The reason Luke wanted to save Anakin is because he believed it would help his father come back to the light earlier instead of having to live a life with the suffering of 20 or so years. Was it a bit unconventional? Sure, but it was Luke's love for his father that drove him to do this. Luke believed his father deserved another chance, especially since he hadn't seen his father since the destruction of the second Death Star over Endor. Luke stumbled through the old Jedi Temple at Tython, accessing documents and finding different studies. Luke moved through the archives, accessing everything he believed he could. This led young Skywalker into the restricted section of the Jedi Temple. The door had been busted open. It was obvious that others had been here before Luke, and he was unsure of what was stolen from the temple before him. There had many things that were missing from the temple, because it seemed like an incomplete map, but the truth is the Jedi never figured out the secrets to the world between worlds, at least of what Luke understood. They were forgotten to time as the Jedi moved away from their ancestral grounds and returned to Coruscant. The Jedi's inability to stay focused on the world between worlds possibly allowed them to crumble, or that of their blindness. As Luke stumbled around, he felt the presence of someone he hadn't felt in a long time either. It was Master Yoda.
Young Skywalker, the answers you seek, found not in old books.
What do you mean, Master Yoda?
Seek not the past. To go forwards you must. The path of a Jedi is always forward.
Master Yoda, I can't just move on. I can fix so much.
Luke, heed my words. What is undone may not resolve what you wish.
The little ghost of the former Jedi Master vanished. Luke thought to himself that it was so odd for Master Yoda to warn him about something that could only be so positive. Luke continued a step further, reading through the archive information, turning the holograms on and listening to what the Jedi had to say. There was so much raw information present. The Jedi may have been onto something, as one of the holograms spoke out to Luke, speaking about a great mural found near another Jedi temple. The temple was hidden on the plains of Lothal. It stood similarly to a rock formation so prevalent across the plains of the planet, though the information regarding the mural was being covered up. What the Jedi found held too much power, that if the Sith discovered it, it could mean the end of everything the Jedi worked so hard to protect. The man urged that whomever saw this message never search for the world between worlds, because it could only give the power to the Sith that they otherwise could not be allowed to have access to. Luke heard the message and kind of rolled his eyes. His father defeated the Sith. Their evil religion was no more. While Luke had no idea or information on what was being built of the ancient homeworld of the Sith on Exegol, he was positive that the Sith were gone. He believed that his father brought balance to the Force by killing the Sith Lord. So Luke left the temple on Tython and took his X-Wing and R2-D2 to the planet of Lothal. Luke knew about Lothal very well. It was something his sister often referenced as one of her first missions without her father. Leia didn't really ever refer to Anakin as her father. She only called Anakin, Anakin, and she referred to Bail Organa as her father. This was because Anakin Skywalker killed her mother, and well, killed her entire family and everything she knew when he blew up Alderaan with Garvin and Tarkin. Not something that could just so easily get over. Regardless, Luke hopped onto his X-Wing and traveled to Lothal. When he eventually arrived, he saw the beautiful skyscrapers that sat overlooking the landscape. Luke smiled. He remembered hearing the stories of the triumph of Lothal. At one point after the battle of the first Death Star, he met General Syndulla. She was incredible. She had a great respect for him and what he did during the battle of the first Death Star. Part of the reason for Hera's respect for Luke was the name. After all, Kanan had talked about the incredible person known as Anakin Skywalker. Kanan saw Anakin train Ahsoka, and so General Syndulla passed on the stories she heard from Kanan to Luke. Aside from the legacy of Skywalker, Luke learned everything about how the rebellion found triumph at Lothal, even with the apparent death of Jedi Ezra Bridger. Regardless, Luke landed on the far side of the planet. It was getting dark, though he got out with R2 by his side and moved towards a small abandoned excavation site. The Empire almost destroyed it, but they were derailed by the insurgents who took over Lothal. While the defeat of Governor Price and the disappearance of Grand Admiral Thrawn of the Empire, they had to pool their forces long before they could ever hide what was discovered here. Luke leapt down into the excavation site, where he turned and saw a large mural. Luke had never seen these characters before, but they were very interesting. Behind him landed R2-D2 after using his rocket thrusters to get down there. The little droid beeped at Luke as he turned around and asked,
R2, you've heard about these creatures before? You mean my father interacted with them?
Luke turned around after R2's response and walked up to the stone, quietly thinking about how he could possibly open this portal, this world between worlds, as it were. Using his non-damaged hand, Luke placed it on the stone cold wall. He could feel the emanance of the Force radiating off of it. Luke closed his eyes and heard the sound emit from his right. Luke turned over and opened his eyes to see a circle of wolves turning around. He looked back at R2 and then started walking over towards the circle, keeping his hand placed gently on the wall. As Luke got to the hole in the wall, he put his hand forward and he was sucked in. Luke flew to the ground and looked up. It was silent. He turned his head to the left and then to the right. All around him were portals, too many to count. He heard the murmurs of voices and the whispers, and crying out of anger. There were faces recognizable, and then there were faces unrecognizable. Luke stepped forward after getting up, and started to walk around. There was something so mystical about all of this. Luke looked around as he saw a younger version of Obi-Wan Kenobi. Not long after that, he saw his friend Lando Calrissian inside of the Millennium Falcon after blowing up the Death Star. There was so much excitement on his face. Luke smiled and continued walking down the path. He could hear Ahsoka's voice, and then he saw Darth Vader. A chill ran down Luke's back as he remembered how purely evil the presence of Darth Vader was. It was cold, filled with pain and suffering, and the opposite of Anakin Skywalker. As Luke looked into the portal, he saw Vader lift up his blade and strike down, missing and then opening up a hole in the ground beneath him and falling into it. Though Vader didn't just whiff his strike, Ahsoka completely vanished from in front of him. Luke was puzzled, but then he heard more voices. It was a voice of a younger Anakin Skywalker. Luke started running. When he looked into the portal, he saw Anakin standing next to another Jedi Master, and on the ground it appeared to be Sidious. Luke wasn't entirely sure. He'd never seen the Dark Lord without a hood on, but he did remember the face that haunted all of his dreams. It was a haunting like the Sith Lord were still alive. Luke watched over the other Jedi, and he watched as he raised his hand. At the same time, Anakin reached for his lightsaber. Luke saw this and used the Force to pull Anakin's lightsaber from his hand and into the world between worlds. Windu didn't notice, but Anakin did as he whipped his head around expecting to see another Jedi Master, but he didn't. He looked into a portal and saw someone that felt familiar to him. Anakin was confused and angry as he reached his hand out to grab his lightsaber back as the sound of a lightsaber connected with Palpatine's body. Luke looked in awe, and then before he could do anything else, he was thrown backwards and the portal closed. Luke slammed his head down and was immediately knocked out. When he woke up, he was still in the world between worlds, but there was nothing. It was complete silence. Luke looked forward and the portal was closed, but in his hands was the same lightsaber he lost on Cloud City years beforehand. The same lightsaber Obi-Wan Kenobi gave to him from his father. Luke was confused as he shook his head and stood up. He turned around and looked for the way that he could exit the world between worlds, but he wasn't entirely sure. Luke wandered around for hours before finally falling through the portal, walking out onto an empty landscape. Luke looked around and thought it would be weird. There was no hole for an excavation site. Luke turned back and his X-Wing was gone. This was really weird. He reached for his communication device and tried to contact R2's frequency, but still there was nothing. Luke assumed that the pirates took his little droid. That was a big issue, but he decided he would make his way back towards the city of Lothal and try and find a ship so he could save his little droid. To Luke, everything felt weird. There was a severe change in the Force. As he walked towards the capital city of Lothal, he started trying to contact people. Leia didn't pick up, Lando didn't pick up, not Chewie, Han, or even Mon Mothma. Of course, all these individuals could be busy, but that clearly wasn't the problem. None of their frequencies were even working. The day was hot in Lothal, but Luke made his way back across the plains of the planet, and when he got to the city, it looked different. While Luke wasn't at all familiar to the planet, he did fly past this city on the way in, and this didn't look like the same city. Luke had a small delusion that, well, maybe it was another city on the planet, but even he knew that was a far-fetched idea. Luke made his way down into the city, and nothing was too different. The people seemed content, and this wasn't a big deal. Luke was looking for a ship that he could take to Trangilia so that he could find Han and Leia. The two chose the world of a former Senator Mon Mothma because it was much more peaceful than the bustling city of Coruscant. Though it's not like Coruscant was going to remain the capital of the galaxy, because the New Republic was changing the capital of the galaxy to the Hosnian system. When Luke walked through the town, he looked up and he saw a sign plastered across the city. Luke stopped and his heart fell down into his stomach. The billboard said, "Celebrate Republic Day with former Chancellor Amidala." Luke wasn't at all too familiar with his maternal lineage, but he did know that Amidala was his mother's last name. Luke knew that there currently wasn't a chancellor named Amidala because the last chancellor was Palpatine and the New Republic's new chancellor was not Amidala. There was no way that the New Republic had a chancellor of his mother's maiden name without him really knowing. Something was really off. Skywalker started walking forward, looking for a small spaceport, and when he got there, he told the clerk he wanted to buy the cheapest vessel he could. The clerk told him the price and the ship model, and Luke pulled out a number of New Republic credits. The clerk looked down and then back to Luke and told him that he needed real money. The clerk looked at Luke and told him that these were not credits that belonged to the Republic. Luke pointed at the credits and told the man that they were credits that belonged to the New Republic. These were brand new, just sent out across the entire galaxy. The man shook his head and asked him who he thought he was, trying to pay with fake credits. Luke sighed and turned around and said his name was Luke Skywalker. The man nearly jumped out of his skin. Luke was confused. He knew he had a reputation, but he didn't think it was that big of a deal. The man came forward and asked Luke why he was trying to buy a ship with fake credits. Why didn't have his mom or dad come pick him up? Luke was beyond confused. He told the man that both of his parents were... Luke paused. He looked down at his belt, and the lightsaber that was attached to it. Luke looked back up and asked the man what he knew of his mother and father. The man shook his head and then started as he told Luke that his father was a Clone Wars hero, that he helped end the Clone War, while his mother was the woman who brought the Republic away from the war and led the Republic into a resurgence of peace after the Clone War. Luke's breath fell out from under him. He stumbled backwards. All the information caught him off guard as he fell backwards into a rack of materials and looked around. Luke's head began spinning. What had he done? What kind of drastic effects did assessing the world between worlds have on him in this galaxy? Luke turned his head, telling the man that he was alright, as he took a step forwards and tumbled down into the wall, crashing through a rack of supplies and landing on the floor cold. The clerk called out, telling someone to get a hold of the medical authorities. Instead of Luke's mind, he traveled to a place he'd never been before. While he was knocked out, he was existing in the world between worlds. Luke existed on a higher plane of existence in this dream. The force was swelling around him, and he felt the power of everything, but then the power of nothing. He could see the same thing again. Anakin, the Jedi, Sidious. He could hear the laughter of Sidious, and the power grew around him. It was the same nightmare that he could never escape ever since the second Death Star. The same nightmare that swallowed him whole every single night. Luke cried out looking for a way out, but it wouldn't stop. The nightmare followed him around every corner, trying to torment him in every which way possible. Sidious was around every corner. Luke's heart rate jumped up and started up and ran up and up and up. He panicked and then shot up. Luke's eyes opened and they were bloodshot. There was a tear rolling down his face and his breath caught up to him. Luke blinked his eyes and then rubbed them. His vision was blurry and then he looked to his right.
Hey there, buddy. Are you alright?
Father, is that you?
I'm right here, Luke. I've got you.
What happened?
Well, you were on Lothal. For some reason, you were trying to use unlicensed credits to, buy a ship.
Yeah, someone stole my droid and my X-Wing.
Your what? Luke, your ship was here on Coruscant. But I have a question. How did you get a hold of my lightsaber? I haven't seen it in 32 years.
Honey, are you alright?
Mother, I don't... This doesn't make sense to me. What have I done?
Luke sat in absolute confusion. His heart rate shot through his soul. His father and mother were standing before him. Padme was so beautiful and Anakin was so handsome. They weren't dead. They weren't ghosts. They were warm, living beings. Luke looked back and forth between the two of his parents. Anakin and Padme looked at their son as they got closer to his side, brushing his hair away from his eyes. Luke's thoughts drifted back to everything he'd seen, everything he'd been through, and yet here he was. Luke slowly fell back into the bed and went back into his mind. Anakin turned over and started talking to Padme about something he was thinking about, what Luke had gone through, and how it was connected to the loss of his lightsaber nearly 32 years beforehand. So much had changed since the night Luke saw. So much of what Luke had known was gone. He changed it all in one moment. Luke hadn't realized the difference between Ezra saving Ahsoka and him saving Anakin, because Ahsoka's death didn't drastically change the course of galactic history. Luke taking away Anakin's lightsaber extinguished the Sith, rather than allow them to take full control over the galaxy. Several hours later, Luke would wake up and see his sister.
Leia, what's happening?
Oh, Luke, I'm so glad to see that you're all right. Mom and Dad were talking about you being a little out of it.
Yeah, I'm fine. Leia, where's Han?
I'm sorry? I don't know what you mean. Who's Han?
Oh no, what have I done?
Luke, what happened? Mom and Dad told me what happened on Lothal.
No, Leia. Everything is upside down.
Luke, please rest. Dad said he'll take you for a walk when you're feeling better. While you're here, enjoy the view of the Jedi Temple.
Leia opened up the blinds and smiled at her brother as she turned and made her way out of the room. Luke turned his head over as he saw the Jedi Temple from across the way. He could feel the presence of Yoda and Obi-Wan, but there were so many more Jedi. Their presence was so much stronger. Luke pondered about how he could even feel Yoda's presence, especially since it was Yoda who died naturally. But the truth is, without the death of his entire Jedi Order, Yoda would be able to grant himself more life, because the loss of his order aged him exponentially, and without that great loss, he was actually doing alright. Luke sat in silence while looking out at Coruscant. The city was beautiful, but everything was so different. Was Luke upset about what happened? He wasn't sure. He had his mother and his father back, but at what cost? His friends were gone. He didn't know what happened to Lando, Chewie, or Han. Luke thought he was making a terrific change by saving his father, but what happened after that? Luke pondered over everything. Within a number of hours, he would leave the hospital and unite with his father. Anakin was waiting for his son and started talking and walking next to him. Before Luke could ask anything, Anakin spoke first.
The night you took my lightsaber away changed everything. The Sith Lord was killed by Master Windu. The Clone Wars came to an end and the Jedi had to stand up for themselves. Shortly after Padme gave birth to you and Leia, she took it upon herself to help the galaxy back to peace. And I decided to leave the Jedi Order. You and Leia were my topmost priority. I know of the world between worlds, but I never believed it would be discovered. There's so much that you don't know about, that you have to relearn about this galaxy, son.
Luke looked back at his father, and Anakin put his hand on his son's back and asked for him to tell him about the galaxy he came from, so that Anakin could connect the dots for him and make everything line up a little bit easier and make this process a little easier for Luke to come to terms with. Because the truth is, inside of the Chancellor's office, he turned around and he saw Luke. He could see him through the world between worlds, but he didn't know who he was at the time. As Luke grew up, Anakin connected the dots, and when Luke returned from Lothal, with his lightsaber, everything made sense. Though Anakin had no clue how to tell anyone about it, he had conversations with Yoda and Jocasta Nu about what he had encountered that night, and Jocasta Nu was the only one who told Anakin about the world between worlds. Regardless, Luke responded to his father.
Well, Dad, that night, you turned to the dark side. The Jedi were wiped out and Obi-Wan defeated you. In that moment, you became Darth Vader. An empire rose and it replaced the Republic. It took 20 years for rebellion to start, and in the end it was Leia who led a rebellion with the man she married. And it was me who turned you from the dark side to return to the light, to defeat Sidious and bring balance to the Force. For the last 6 years, I was rebuilding the Jedi Order, and Leia was building the new Republic while having a son.
Anakin was noticeably horrified, not able to believe that any of that was capable of him. But in retrospect, he was a younger man. He would have done anything, and he almost did. Oftentimes, Anakin did think about what would have happened if he was able to strike at Windu. But truthfully, there was a lot that his son needed to learn about this new era, and so father and son walked side by side. They talked about everything that had happened. Anakin revealed that Obi-Wan had become Master of the Order after the natural death of Mace Windu. The Jedi returned to their peaceful ways and the Clone Wars came to a rapid end. Most of the clones by this point had passed away of natural death, but those who didn't were taken well care of. Of course, Luke knew about Padme and her successes, but the truth is, both Luke and Leia were successful children as well. Both of them learned the ways of the Force from their father, and they both had their own lightsabers, though for Luke and Leia, these were for protective measures taken by their father. Anakin wanted to make sure that both of them were ready in any case anything came in their way. Anakin explained to his son that Leia and him were growing into powerful politicians. As far as Anakin was aware, both of them loved working in the political field and working on the betterment of those inside of the Republic. Typically, the brother and sister duo went out into the Outer Rim to protect and serve those who needed protection and help. Anakin expressed that when they were of age, they were given the choice to join the Jedi Order or be what they wanted to be elsewhere. Leia almost chose to become a Jedi, and she decided against it because she believed in thriving outside of the Jedi Order. Of course, there were hundreds of individual stories that Anakin would have to tell his son about, but the truth is, Luke was holding back tears. He was finally getting the life he had always deserved, but so was Anakin. This was the life meant for the Skywalker family, the success and modesty of true royalty. Anakin did ask who raised him, and Luke told him that it was a combination of Owen, Beru, and Obi-Wan as well. The words brought tears to Anakin's eyes, not because of Owen and Beru, but the fact that Obi-Wan, even after having to lose his entire order and defeat his own apprentice in combat, decided to help and raise his own son. That was an unbelievable choice made by Obi-Wan, when he could have cast away the Skywalker children. But that left another question: who raised Leia if Owen and Beru didn't? To which Luke informed him that it was the Organas. The craziest part about this galaxy was how perfect it felt. It was as if nothing was wrong with the galaxy he entered. There was apparently no Sith, and the Jedi had survived. But this also meant that Yoda and Obi-Wan had no memories of the Luke they trained, only memories of the Luke from this universe. Luke had a completely different perception of everything in this galaxy, and that was because this wasn't his galaxy, though it was the perfect galaxy. Anakin also explained that someone who was close to Anakin was there for Luke and Leia as they grew up. That was Ahsoka Tano. When Anakin said her name, a chill shot down his back, and Anakin even noticed the expression on Luke's face, so he cautiously asked what the reaction was for. only for Luke to tell his father that as Darth Vader he killed Ahsoka. That is until Ezra Bridger used the World Between Worlds to save her. Anakin's reaction was saddened and then shocked, because Anakin knew Ezra. Oddly enough, Ezra Bridger was one of the most prestigious Jedi on the High Council. He was only 32 and he sat on the Jedi High Council as a master. He had an incredibly high midichlorian count, and he was found shortly after the end of the Clone Wars on Lothal. Anakin had interacted with him a couple of times, and Ezra was trained by Quinlan Vos, and well, he grew exponentially with Vos as his teacher. Regardless, Anakin and Luke continued talking. This would lead them back to Padme's residence. It was one of the titled former Chancellor residences that could only be accessed by someone who served as Chancellor of the Republic. These were mansion-sized buildings in the luxury district of Coruscant, with the best eateries, shops, attractions, and entertainment surrounding them. Though the luxury didn't rid the Skywalker family of their values. Being that both Anakin and Padme were public servants, they taught their children the importance of caring for others and seeing to it that people are taken care of, especially those with less. The Skywalker twins were the only children that Anakin and Padme had, but they were the pride of not just the family but of the Republic. Luke and Leia grew up in the spotlight because of the Jedi who left the Jedi Order, and the senator who saved the Republic from the aftermath as Chancellor. The Jedi had fallen into their own respective feelings towards the matter, but many of them didn't really care once Anakin chose to leave the Jedi Order. Anakin informed Luke that they were pirates in the Outer Rim, and they appeared shortly after the end of the Clone Wars, though the clone troopers made short work of Crimson Dawn. The reason Anakin told Luke about this is because he wanted to inform his son about the mission he and his sister were going on into the Outer Rim on. Anakin told Luke that while he would like to explain more to him, Leia would be best suited for it, because Leia and Luke served together all the time. They actually had a little rivalry going on too. Anakin knew the names of most of their friends, allies, and opponents, but he didn't really know which face they belonged to each person. Anakin suggested that if Luke was up to it, to go with his sister into the Outer Rim to serve the Republic. They'd be escorted by a couple 7th generation clone troopers. After the Clone Wars ended, the Republic continued to pay for clones, but in much lesser numbers. Most clones active these days were bred not for war but for protection. The Republic had expanded out into the far Outer Rim, and they began to colonize the area, welcoming new planets into the Republic. Though with this expansion and several years of neglect, the clone troopers were necessary for bringing order into the Outer Rim. Luke and Leia, as representatives of the Republic, were being sent out into the Outer Rim to bring order to the worlds of Hypori, Utapau, Geonosis, and Rakata Prime. Luke didn't really know what he was doing at this point, because all the skills he was supposed to have as a politician, he didn't really have. Luke was a moisture farmer turned Jedi. He didn't grow up in a prestigious world of Coruscant. Anakin put his arm around his son as the two of them walked side by side back to the residence. This moment was incredible for Luke. He never had this kind of bond before with a fatherly figure, and now he had it with his actual dad. Luke asked Anakin why he wasn't coming with them, and Anakin told him that he and his mother were going on a vacation to Naboo. It was their anniversary and it was time for them to be by themselves, on a planet Luke and Leia were raised on. Part of Luke died internally, realizing that he missed 32 years of a life he never got to enjoy. But part of him enjoyed the sacrifice, the self-sacrifice he made to have it. He may have missed out on 32 of what would have been the best years of his life, but the galaxy didn't have to face the torment that he grew up with, and he could live with that. Several hours later, Luke and Leia were on a transport out to the Outer Rim. There was a Jedi Knight with the two of them. There were also a number of other politicians. They all knew Luke, but he didn't know any of them. Leia had to explain everything to Luke, and honestly, she loved helping her brother with relearning everything he needed to relearn. Luke listened intently and reintroduced himself to all the people who he had previously met in his life, of the life he didn't live. Though there was someone here that neither Luke or Leia knew, and that was a fiery redhead of a Jedi Knight sitting in there. She sat quietly and she observed. She was just a Jedi Knight and she had refused to be taking on a student of her own. She introduced herself to Luke as Mara Jade. The rest of the voyage to the Outer Rim was fine. Travel from planet to planet was fine as well, though the Jedi and the Skywalker children ended up feeling a disturbance on Hypori. While the politicians were in the main city of Hypori working on a deal between the Republic and the planet, Mara Jade, Leia Skywalker, and Luke Skywalker walked out into the wilderness. There was a disturbance in the Force and all three of them felt it. Mara Jade was well aware that both Skywalker children were Force sensitive, and she respected the twins as if they were Jedi. Considering both Luke and Leia carried their own lightsabers with them, it was kinda made sense. Though there was something ironic. Luke had a lightsaber from this timeline that was modeled off of his father's lightsaber, with a green tint to it. But since Luke was so comfortable with the lightsaber he carried and created in Ben's image, he continued to walk with it. The trio walked across the sands of Hypori as they found themselves a small campfire. Mara walked over to the fire and placed her hand down on the ash, and told the other two that it was still warm. Luke ignited a lightsaber when he heard a lightsaber ignite over him, as he used the Force to push Mara and Leia out of the way. Maul and Darth Talon slammed down. Talon smashed her blade against Luke's as Darth Maul barely missed Mara Jade. Maul and Talon had been avoiding the Republic for years. When the Crimson Dawn was destroyed shortly after the Clone Wars, Maul disappeared into the shadows and adopted himself a student in Darth Talon. Luke moved back as Mara and Leia ignited their lightsabers and made their push on Darth Maul. Luke and Talon began swinging and exchanging blows with each other, while Leia and Mara threw their hardest strikes at Maul. The aging Sith Lord tumbled back, falling off balance as the two Jedi made their hardest push. The duel got intense before it fell apart very quickly. Mara Jade struck down on Maul as Luke killed Talon. It was a failed sneak attack, but it ended the legacy of the Sith, very quickly too. Luke and Mara during this time got extremely close, but this also allowed Luke to get in touch with his political side, as he was known for in this time frame. Luke found some passion for it because he realized the power of his words and what they did for a situation. It made him see how truly senseless the Empire was and how useful the power of the Republic is and was before the time of the Empire and how it rose in its place. Luke also felt a strong connection to the Jedi Knight he was with, though he had a bit of a struggle because Mara was a Jedi and he knew a Jedi couldn't have attachments. When the group eventually returned to Coruscant, Mara had returned to the Jedi Temple, and Luke returned to the residence of his parents to see his room for the first time. It was inside of Padme's mansion, and his room overlooked the city. It was the most beautiful view his room had ever had. Luke's room on Tatooine had no windows. Leia got back to her room and took some rest while Luke walked back out to the main residence and looked out across the city. The area was beautiful and Luke sat down and pondered his feelings. There was a lot for him to consider. How would he address his new life and politics? How would he address his new feelings? As he thought, a small speeder rolled up, and out came R2-D2, Padme Amidala, and Anakin Skywalker. C-3PO came around the corner, so ecstatic to see everyone. Padme came up to Luke and kissed him on the forehead, saying,
"I'm so happy to see you, my dear. Are you hungry? We got food from Naboo."
Hello, Mom. Yeah, I could eat.
Hey Luke, what's on your mind, son?
Padme walked out of the room with a smile on her face. Anakin told her about everything, and Padme was incredibly proud of Luke for doing what he had to do. Padme hadn't realized what the issue was. It had been mentioned to her before in the past, but she didn't realize that it was actually entirely possible, and so when Anakin explained it to her, she understood everything. Luke looked at his father as Anakin sat down next to him.
Well, it's a bit much. Everything is so different. Also, we killed Darth Maul and his student, but taking on the role of a politician is a bit different to me. But I think I'm ready. Also, there's a Jedi that has caught my eye, but she's, well, a Jedi.
Well, Luke, I have to tell you, Obi-Wan will be relieved to hear Maul is gone. But you have to follow your heart, son. Trust in the Force, and what you believe will best suit you, because it will lead you to happiness. As for the Jedi, talk to her about sand. It worked for me.
Luke looked at his father with a puzzled expression, but his father got up from the couch and walked over into the other room, where he wrapped up his wife in his arms. Luke watched with a glorious smile, as the words his father said to him sat in his mind and in his heart. Our story continues on the city world of Coruscant. Luke woke up in his room, and his thoughts sat on the new world he was welcomed into. Everything felt so different to Luke. He couldn't sleep. To his right was the entire city of Coruscant. It was beautiful, and yet it felt so much more different than the Coruscant he knew. Luke, after the rebellion defeated the Empire, had the chance to see what would become of the temporary capital of the New Republic. Coruscant was considerably happy with the fall of the Empire. Celebrations happened shortly after Palpatine's death. But the Empire cracked down on the planet with Operation Cinder, and several other contingency plans. While Operation Cinder never saw Coruscant, the people of the capital planet saw the pain around the galaxy from the contingency plans. They wore it. It was like a burden of unwanted trauma, and it weighed down on the people. Of course, after the Empire there was happiness, but this was different. After all, for these people in this timeline, it had been 32 years since the end of the Clone Wars, since the disappearance of the Sith from the main galactic stage, and aside from the now dead Maul and Talon, the Sith were gone. In his own mind. Luke's mind drifted towards what could have become of the other Luke that should have been present here. So Luke pushed himself up and sat in the middle of his bed and closed his eyes, focusing on the Force. He assumed that if he searched for his own essence, he could likely find the other Luke, but after an hour or so he couldn't find anything. Then Luke came up with a theory. Is it possible that it could be wrong? Of course. But Luke assumed that he and the Luke from this timeline switched, because they are both curious individuals. And there could have been another means for Luke to access the world between worlds, being that in that same period of time, Luke from this peaceful timeline accidentally allowed his father to commit the crime of cutting off Mace Windu's hand, in the same way that Luke pulled Anakin's lightsaber, creating this timeline that he now existed in. The Luke from this timeline may have accidentally forced Anakin's hand. Luke was able to perpetuate this theory by assuming that the Luke from this timeline, not having grown up in the struggles of Tatooine or war, he could have been curious as to what would have happened on that tragic night if everything changed. And in doing so, he didn't get Mace's hand cut off, but instead Anakin killed Windu by mistake, because a Luke who didn't have the trials of facing down Darth Vader wouldn't have had the precision of a Luke that did. It was a far-fetched idea, but it felt right. There was no sight of this other Luke, and so maybe he was right. In all actuality, he was right. Both Lukes, through the mysticism of the Force, entered the world between worlds at the exact same time during different timelines, and ended up completely flipping and switching, becoming individuals a part of different universes and timelines. The Luke born on Tatooine had a much more pleasant adjustment to the Luke born on Coruscant, who was welcomed into the hellscape of a fallen empire, learning that his sister was married and that his father committed a mass genocide more frequently than he changed armor. Regardless, Luke moved on from his bedroom to the center lobby of the apartment, where he sat silently. His father walked up to him and asked him,
Is everything all right, son?
Yeah, Father, it's just a bit weird. I mean, everything is a bit weird. I don't really know how to process everything. I honestly would like to talk to Masters Kenobi and Yoda.
If you believe that'll make you feel better, I'll have it arranged for you. After all, Obi-Wan's been looking forward to meeting you. I told him about what you said to me, about how he raised you when I wasn't around.
Anakin patted Luke on the shoulder and told him that it would be the best for him to get some rest. When Luke made his way back to his bedroom, he fell down to the floor in his room. Memories and visions of the past that did not exist here fell into him. He remembered Order 66 through Grogu's memory, and he felt the trauma and pain and suffering of so many. And then, the breathing. It was like the breathing didn't go away, like it hadn't vanished. Luke was haunted by his meeting with the Emperor on the second Death Star, because the Emperor lived in his mind. In this timeline, the Emperor was never even a thing, nor did he ever get past Mace Windu and Anakin Skywalker, but he was still something Luke couldn't escape. Luke was quiet about everything, and he got himself back up on his bed and pressed his hands to his face, feeling the soft skin of touch in one hand and the rough fabric of the glove in the other. Luke couldn't escape the feeling that something was off. While sure the galaxy seemed right, it was almost too right. Like it was a sick game being played on him by an external force. Maybe it was a lack of clarity in the Coruscant night, or maybe it was just a reflection of unfinished business, not done by the Emperor, but those who came before. While there was an impression that the Chosen One had helped restore balance of the Force, maybe that wasn't the truth, and the shadows had been lying not just for 32 years, but instead 42 years. Luke fell into his bed, as it felt like the bed was covering around him, suffocating him in a coffin of silence. There was so much wrong. What more could be done or said in this timeline? What more did he miss? Where was Han and Chewie? And what about everyone else? So much pressure. It felt like a bubble was blowing up inside of Skywalker's head. How could he possibly avoid this? It felt nearly unstoppable, like there was nothing he could do but lament here. Luke's heart rate picked up in his body, couldn't find a balance between hot and cold, tossing and turning, and after so little time here, the perfection came crashing down into non-existence. There was something evil here on Coruscant, something that wasn't here during his timeline, and it was calling out to him because he still had visions of the Emperor. Luke put his head into his pillow and finally fell into a deep sleep. He crashed hard, and then the night terrors began, following Vader into the reactor as the Death Star exploded, watching Han Solo be killed by a fiery crimson blade, and at the end of all of it, Leia dying a lonely death surrounded by strangers. Luke woke up, jolted by the sound of an explosion. He looked outside of his window and saw terror. Imperial Star Destroyers raining hell down onto a population of Coruscant. It was all a dream. It was all fake. And then he heard laughing. Luke's breath picked up. He couldn't move. He looked out and saw Palpatine rounding the corner, laughing as he ever did so slowly, calling him boy before laughing at him. A fool because all of it was a deception. Everything he believed was real was just the imagination of the Force. The darkness was calling to him, and it was time for Luke to become what his father could never dream of becoming. Luke cried out in terror and shot up. He looked around the darkened room. His breath was heavy, and the room was silent. It was still dark outside of his room, aside from the lights of Coruscant, the lights that never slept, and yet there was no sign of terror. Luke lowered himself back down and his breath shallowed. He hoped he hadn't screamed aloud, and luckily he hadn't. Luke closed his eyes for a moment and knew that he needed to tell the Jedi Masters about this. He needed to deal with this because if he didn't, then it would forever plague him. Luke knew that Palpatine would always be with him, because the nightmares hadn't stopped in the decades since Palpatine's apparent death in the second Death Star in Luke's original timeline. Apparently those night terrors wouldn't come to an end. The rest of the night would be rather arduous, but in the morning, everything felt a little better for Luke, as his father took him to the Jedi Temple. This for Luke was an awe-inspiring moment. He'd been to the Coruscant Temple before, but never like this. Seeing so many Jedi, there were now 15,000 Jedi inside the Jedi Temple. There had been a massive boost in adequate Force-sensitive beings since the death of Palpatine, and in the 32 years since the end of the Clone Wars. They'd bolstered their numbers incredibly fast. The Jedi just didn't operate off of Coruscant, but they also now operated off of Dantooine, where they rebuilt the formerly fallen Jedi Temple. The Coruscant Temple was incomparable, quite even emotional for Luke, because he'd never seen so many Jedi and they all looked so happy, like there wasn't a thing wrong with the galaxy. And truthfully, there wasn't. The Hutt, Sigerians, Black Sun, and various other crime families had been driven from power, all of which happening shortly after the end of the Clone Wars. Luke walked through the hallways and was reminded of the nightmare that had happened here. See, when Luke visited the Jedi Temple after the fall of the Empire, he visited a reconstructed temple that was meant to fit the ideal image of Palpatine, who crowned the former Jedi Temple as his castle. The only images Luke ever saw of the Jedi Temple were from Grogu's flashbacks and from images he'd seen of the temple before it fell. This was much different. This was grandeur. It wasn't in ruins, it was absolutely remarkable. Anakin noticed that Luke was taking in the views, and he didn't say much to him. Anakin didn't really conceptualize how much of what Luke had gone through, or the galaxy Luke came from, but it would have horrified him if he actually saw what he and the 501st did inside the temple. And yes, speaking of the clones, most if not all of them had died by this point. They all aged out and their lives ended rather peacefully. The Republic allowed them to integrate into certain sectors of the galaxy without intermingling too much in the intergalactic gene pool. Reason being is that the Republic didn't want the children of the clones to have defects, because it was very often that they did have defects, such as an accelerated growth and being more physically dominant, sometimes even more violent. Though it depended on the clone or not. Captain Rex had served with the Grand Army of the Republic for another 3 years after the end of the Clone Wars, before he stepped down and retired. Anakin was with his captain in the last moments before he passed away. Regardless, Luke and Anakin ran into a proud Jedi Master, that being Master Ahsoka Tano. She had surprisingly rejoined the Jedi Order a couple years after the Clone Wars, having seen the Jedi change direction and focus more on missionary work and helping the people of the galaxy. It was the only reason she actually decided to rejoin the Jedi Order, because they were finally doing what their mandate suggested they do. Ahsoka noticed that Luke was wearing a different outfit, and she said hi to him, and explained that Kenobi and Yoda were waiting for them. Ahsoka had joined the ranks of the Jedi High Council during this time, and she was a very prominent voice for the entire Jedi Order. Of course, sitting in a council with voices such as Yoda, Kenobi, Depa Billaba, Shaak Ti, and Plo Koon, it was pretty obvious that there were a lot of influential voices. It was probably the best council they had since the Clone Wars. Regardless, the Skywalkers walked forward towards the room of the 2 Jedi Masters that were residing in it. Anakin told his son to head in. He'd wait outside until he was done, and then he would join them. Luke walked in and noticed that both Jedi were old, but in a healthy way. Obi-Wan was 70, but he didn't wear it. He wasn't entirely gray, his skin looked healthy, and so did his beard. He didn't look like someone who had tried to kill his best friend or lose his order, or sleep on rocks in the desert for 20 years. He was very healthy looking, and still a fit Jedi Master, and Yoda, while being over 900 years old, looked great too. Again, not having to live with the Order falling, and doing his morning routine face work in the swamps of Dagobah, which really helped his 900-year-old look stay rather dapper.
Young Skywalker, nice it is to see you again.
Hello there, Luke. What can we help you with?
Ben, Yoda, it's great to see you. I suspect my father told you about everything that had happened and what I'd gone through.
For the most part, yes, he did.
Well, firstly, thank you for all your guidance. I know you two don't remember it, but it was very influential on my life. Secondly, there is a darkness lurking here on Coruscant. The Emperor, who you would refer to as Palpatine, has haunted my dreams since Vader defeated him, and he still haunts them. I don't know what to do.
Trust the Force, Luke. A guide it may be, for a future yet unknown.
Are you suggesting that the Sith have returned once more?
No, maybe, I don't know. All I do know is that there is a darkness here and it's calling to me. I'd assume because I'm used to a much darker timeline. I come from a time where I am one of less than 100 Jedi in the galaxy.
Come, young Skywalker. Use the Force we will to find where this darkness comes from.
Luke took a step forward and got down on the ground between the two Jedi as they leaned over and placed their hands on his shoulder, both of them focusing on the Force. They told Luke to go into his mind and see where the darkness was coming from, yet nothing was really coming from it. It seemed like there was just a loop in the galaxy itself, though the Jedi stayed focused for several hours, and the only conclusion they came to was nothing. Just nightmares. The Jedi told Luke to focus on finding himself peace with what has been and what will be. In such a peace, he would be able to find solidarity and even happiness. But if Luke struggled, then they would be here if he needed them. Luke walked out of the room a little disappointed. Maybe it was that he hadn't found his own peace yet. That surely wasn't far-fetched of an idea, because truthfully, how could he even found his inner peace in such a short period of time? Luke needed to practice that peace. The Jedi did also offer him up a position inside of their order, allowing him to start off as a Jedi Knight. The reason being is that Luke was already trained as a Jedi Knight, and because Anakin wasn't seen as a failure of a test, then it should work relatively well if Luke wanted to join the Order at 32 years old. Luke didn't want to join the Order at the moment, and he exited the temple with his father. On the way out, he saw the fiery redhead and made a strategic approach.
Mara, how good to see you. It's been too long.
Indeed it has been. How have the politics of the galaxy been treating you?
Not as well as the sand. Let me tell you, remarkable.
I'm sorry. What?
You know, like how great sand is, and yeah, how sand and politics are the same, filled with so many possibilities and even potential.
I'm not following. Are you all right, Luke?
Yeah, I'm doing terrific.
Really? Sounds like you're going to build a sandcastle.
Well, no, maybe no sandcastles today.
All right. Well, it was nice catching up.
I've got to be in the training halls. I'll see you around, Sandboy.
Luke turned around. That was excruciating. Not nearly as bad as the look on his father's face, though. Luke could feel a seething disappointment from his father. The two walked next to each other, as Mara turned around, whipping her hair out of her face, as she looked back at Luke as he walked with his father out of the temple. What a weird conversation.
What was that, Luke?
You told me to talk about sand. I don't know what that means.
Oh, my Force, Luke, be romantic. I still remember what I told your mother. I don't like sand. It's coarse and it's rough and irritating and it gets everywhere. Not like here. Here everything is soft and smooth. I mean, seriously, Luke, it's not that hard.
Okay, but Dad, I like sand.
You what? You like sand? Not even the Luke from this timeline liked sand? How in the galaxy could you like sand? You grew up on Tatooine, right?
Well, yeah, I did, but you're missing the point. How on Coruscant did that line work on Mom?
Luke, you see, I'm the Riz Master. It's all about your composure. Come on, I'll teach you.
Dad, I'm 32. I think I'll try my own approach.
Alright, suit yourself. Sandboy.
Anakin pushed Luke a little and started walking out of the temple. Luke smiled and then turned around. He caught a glimpse of Mara looking in his direction before she immediately whipped around after seeing Luke catch her in the act of looking in his direction. Luke grinned. It may have not been a smooth move, but it at least got her attention, somehow. Luke and Anakin left the Jedi Temple as Luke began thinking about where his life would take him. So many choices. There was the path of the Jedi, there was a path of the politician, and there was a path of the sand, which hilariously was a combination of Jedi politician and Mara. See, Luke began to think about it. Maybe the sand had a deeper meaning. Anakin didn't go further into it, but maybe there was a point to it. Regardless, Luke's sister was off-world. She had to go to Corellia to negotiate a trade deal, though while she was there, she needed repairs for her shuttle. Leia didn't personally oversee her vessel's construction, but the guards took the vessel to the best shop in all of Corellia. It was run by a local, and the shop was called Solos. It sold starships of all sorts, speeders, and even hovercraft. Everything anyone in Corellia could ever want. The shop was run and owned by a husband and wife. They had a couple kids, but all the kids went off-world to follow their own dreams. The husband's name was Han and his wife was Kira. They were never able to get off of Corellia, and after the Republic won the Clone Wars, the crime and mob bosses who called Corellia home were forced out or destroyed by clone forces. Sure, it was a step down from the accomplishments of the men during the Clone Wars, but it was far better than being phased out by commando-trained civilians dressed in armor that wasn't nearly as good as your own. Han and Kira's lives drastically changed thanks to the Republic. Had the Republic not cracked down on the mob bosses after the Clone Wars, chances are Han and Kira would be killed or be in a much worse predicament. They were able to build a business, and through a little bit of illegal activity, Han was able to accumulate a solid amount of wealth. This illegal activity was in the underground street racing of Corellia. He made a lot of credits during that brief stint of time in his life. He and Kira saved up some credits and opened up a small shop near the dockyards, which turned out to be a brilliant idea for business. All the people who traveled to work on the docks were able to get their speeders repaired on the way or during work hours, and then pick up their fixed vehicles when they were done and heading back. Solo built a small-time empire with his first love, and they were living happily ever after on Corellia. Their work was popular enough to garner the attention of politicians traveling to Corellia and going off-world, which is exactly how Leia's shuttle ended up inside of their shop. Incredibly close to meeting someone who in another time would have changed each other's lives. Leia's short stint on Corellia would have her returning to Coruscant after her trade debacle. It was rather unsuccessful, but on the bright side, her vessel was flying like it was brand new. On Coruscant, Luke was spending his time with his mother in the luxury district. The two of them were getting some quality mom and son time, especially considering Luke hadn't ever gotten it before. Luke was still in a bit of a ruse. The dark side surrounded everything, and yet he was able to find peace with his mother. She had a very calming essence, something Anakin felt on Naboo before finding his mother, captured and abused by the Tuscans. Padme shared the stories about everything, certain events he may have missed, and so forth. There was so much that Luke needed to be caught up on. Padme told Luke about family vacations to incredible planets around the galaxy. Luke came to learn about the family lake house on Naboo, and how eager Padme was to introduce her family to him. There was so much he could experience for the first time. While this was rather arduous, even say, difficult for Padme, it was also exciting. She got to go through this experience with Luke and Leia when they were babies, and into small children, the excitement of everything in the new stages of life, where infants and children soaked up information like sponges. Padme got to, in a way, enjoy that with her son again, but this time she would be able to enjoy it with her son as an adult, where he could effectively communicate his emotions and feelings to her. It was kind of something so sweet, and yet something so unforgettable for a parent, something Padme never thought she'd have the joy of enjoying again with her son. Though, of course, she understood the predicament of such occurrences having to happen, and she felt bad that Luke had to undergo this transformation into this timeline, but she realized how important and pivotal her role was for her son, because he never had her in his timeline. He never even met her, let alone knew her. With her being here, she could have already had an incredible effect on him, and she did, and such effect needed to be positive, and Padme's eyes, during this time, she needed to be positive. During this walk through the park, Luke would reveal to his mother the dreams that he'd been having. It's not that he didn't want to tell his father, it's just a matter of the moment where he was with his mother. During their walk through the luxurious districts, Luke would tell his mother that he was having terrible nightmares, and Padme had all the right responses for her son, informing him that his father had very similar experiences when they were younger. Though Anakin's dreams were always seeming to revolve around premonitions involving those he loved. And thankfully, Anakin's visions of Padme dying during childbirth were false, but there were also several other visions afterwards that did come true. But what Padme heard from her son made her in a way worry for him. The dreams sounded very intense and nearly traumatic. Padme told Luke that she wanted him to talk to his father about the dreams and see if there was anything they could do about those dreams. Luke mentioned how he told Obi-Wan and Yoda previously, but not even Luke had mentioned to anyone how every night they were becoming increasingly worse. The nightmares were hyper-realistic, so tangible it felt a part of the real galaxy, and they only got worse, leading him further and further away from inner peace. Padme talked to Anakin about this, and he started to think about how he could help his son. The difficult part for both Padme and Anakin is that their son, from this timeline, would have been much easier to help because they knew him. But they didn't know the war hero that their son was now. The Luke that they had now was much different. He was a much different man, and he needed to be treated and cared for as such. Anakin spent a lot of time meditating, trusting the Force that it would guide him through this process to make sure his son was doing alright, and make sure that he could actually help his son through this process. One night, while Leia was off-world, Luke rose from his sleep. He stepped through the house without inflection in his stride. He walked like a man possessed. He got into his speeder and shot across the city world of Coruscant. Luke wasn't even fully awake. He wasn't even sure what he was doing. And then he arrived in an old rusted building, ages older than the era of the High Republic. Luke landed the vessel and got out of it. He felt the darkness swelling around him, though this wasn't Palpatine. Luke walked forward, and out from the darkness came disfigured beings, screaming at him and tackling him to the ground. A deep, coarse, and creepy voice echoed out of the chamber, telling the creatures to bring Luke to him. The creatures dragged Luke to the other room, where instead of an altar, like there had been during the era of Palpatine, there were now test tubes lining the halls of the room, and in the middle, and in every open crevice, a Sith artifact. The room was incredibly powerful with the dark side of the Force, and it made Luke naturally weak. The creature ordering others around was tall, but very decrepit. His body almost seemed to be in shambles, and when his face was revealed by the light, it was a heavily damaged Mun. Luke looked over at the Mun in shock. He didn't know who it was, so Luke demanded to know who it was. The Sith Lord stood over Luke and said,
"I am Darth Plagueis the Wise. I've been watching your family for decades."
"You're the Sith Lord?"
"I am the only Sith Lord. My foolish apprentice assumed I was weak enough to be killed, but he was wrong."
"What do you want with me?"
"Everything. I've got samples from Palpatine to Mace Windu. I've raided the midichlorians from dead bodies, and I've begun a new Sith. But these Sith are entirely subservient to me. I create them with the Force and grow them within these tubes."
You're a monster."
"No, I'm a survivor, and I will do what my foolish apprentice couldn't accomplish with a galactic war. My spawn will take over what has never been conquered before."
"Wait, who is your apprentice?"
"Palpatine. He thought he killed me in my sleep, but he forgot that I mastered the ability to escape death. He was so arrogant in his power. When I returned to my sanctuary here, I discovered him using my lair, so I decided to wait him out. I was foolish to trust him with my knowledge, but he was blinded by his inability to have clairvoyance in his endeavor to destroying the Jedi."
Luke looked in horror at Plagueis. He couldn't believe that Palpatine had an evil master, and even more than that, the fact that he was still alive. It didn't make any sense, but a moment later a needle was shoved into his back and he fell deep into sleep. Plagueis was so pleased. He'd spent decades preparing for this moment. Plagueis knew he wouldn't be able to defeat Anakin on his own, because he just wasn't powerful enough to defeat something created purely by the Force. That's part of the reason he forced Maul and Talon out to face Luke. He believed that Luke would lower his guard if he defeated Maul and Talon, which is exactly what happened. Luke's guard was completely lowered because he believed all the Sith had been destroyed. The beings that Plagueis was creating now weren't able to develop into high-thinking creatures. They were disfigured, and they could only do nothing but listen. It was to assure to Plagueis that he wouldn't be betrayed by these minions like he was by Palpatine. Once Luke was knocked out, Plagueis ordered his minions to load up his ship and prepare for launch. The Sith Lord was going to take Luke off-world and have him executed, away from his lair, and then return to begin his creation of more minions from the blood of Skywalker. Plagueis had dozens of minions, but they were all of various ages, and many of them were not fully developed. Regardless, Plagueis entered his vessel and the ship took off. Inside of the Jedi Temple, Mara Jade woke up. She felt Luke's essence as if it was in danger. Mara leapt from her bed and ran towards Master Tano's room and woke her up, telling her that Luke was in serious danger. Plagueis' vessel took off and left the system, leaving towards the planet of Kashyyyk. Mara and Ahsoka ran towards the hangar bay of the Jedi Temple. Ahsoka made contact with the Fleet Command as their two starships flew out of the hangar bay of the Jedi Temple towards the hyperspace rings above the planet. Ahsoka contacted the men on the comms, asking if they had any readout on any particular ships leaving the atmosphere. The truth is, they didn't, and they couldn't even if they did. Sure, the Republic officers didn't have an issue with the Jedi, but the Republic had no obligation to take orders from the Jedi, or hand out classified information, especially considering Luke wasn't Anakin or Padme, and he hadn't, up until this point, garnered enough of a reputation to be searched for by the Republic. Ahsoka communicated to Mara, telling her that it was her who had to connect to Luke. She would be the only one who could save him. Ahsoka told Mara to trust the Force and focus on the connection she had with Luke. While Leia and Anakin had a really deep connection with Luke through the Force, they didn't have the same connections with this Luke. The only reason Mara picked up on Luke so quickly was because of their little mission previously. Their connection was very quickly built off of an intense bond. Mara focused her mind, and she was taken to a forest moon. But she saw a different Luke Skywalker. It wasn't the sand-loving man she knew thus far, it was something else. Mara told Ahsoka that there would be a forested world, but there were so many forested planets in the galaxy that she didn't know which one it was. Mara turned around and then she saw a Kaibuk, the horned and hooved creatures that were native exclusively to the planet of Kashyyyk. Mara yelled out the name of the planet, and immediately Ahsoka and Mara shot off into hyperspace towards the Wookiee homeworld. On Kashyyyk, Plagueis had his minions drag Skywalker out into the forest. The reason Plagueis brought Luke here was on the off chance that someone had a connection with him, followed him here, wouldn't discover Plagueis' labs on Coruscant. Luke was laying down in the floors of Kashyyyk. Plagueis instructed his minions to get the blast blood cells required before the execution, and then Luke rose up. Plagueis smiled, reaching his hands forward preparing to shoot electricity into Skywalker, and then he realized something. Something he was fully unaware of up until this point. He and Skywalker were inextricably connected. This was simply because, in a way, Plagueis was Anakin's father, and he never knew that, meaning that he had a direct path to Luke, which in turn for the Sith Lord meant that he could extract Luke's conscience and turn him into his own personal slave. Plagueis reached forward and began an ancient Sith ritual.
Irutima, Tikasha ritumbi reanudo kinito, Prireseta tumreka, Tunushi turito iru irshafito libata oit, Keno bermuti.
Luke began shaking back and forth, and his eyes rolled into the back of his head as he rose from the ground with the snapping and cracking of what sounded like broken bones. Plagueis smiled proudly, telling Luke that he would wait here and kill whoever crossed his path. There were meant to be no survivors. Once he killed the Jedi, he would find himself his way back to the planet of Coruscant and join his new master. Plagueis and his minions upped and left Kashyyyk. The amount of activity in the jungle drew a tribe of Wookiees. They were interested in who had landed, as they went in to investigate, and then they were slaughtered by Luke Skywalker, mercilessly. All the men, women, and children of the tribe were massacred, and their villages and their trees were set aflame. As Luke left the village, he sat in the middle of a clearing as the fires cascaded around him. The sounds of animals running could be heard as their stampede exited the forest, trying to escape the raging fire. Amongst the chaos, 2 Jedi starships landed in the clearing. Mara got out of the ship and called out to Luke, but he didn't move. Ahsoka noticed this, telling Mara to stay clear of Luke as he rose from the ground and turned around, facing the 2 Jedi. Ahsoka and Mara got up next to each other. It was clear there was something not right with Luke, and they couldn't allow him to continue down this treatment. Ahsoka, being a Jedi Master, had access to the restricted section of the Jedi archives, and she told Mara that she needed a moment to think on this. Luke ignited his lightsaber, and Mara reciprocated by igniting her own lightsaber. Mara told Ahsoka that she would give her as much time as she needed. Mara tried to coax Luke down, talking about things she knew about him, at which point was rather hard to do because he was acting a little bit like a psycho. Luke was noticeably off balance, like there was a small part of him hanging on, desperately trying to fight the power that was corrupting him. Luke swung viciously at Mara as he fell to the ground, losing balance and cutting his own face with his lightsaber as he tumbled to the ground. He growled in pain as he turned around. Mara looked at Luke. There was a mark on his face that barely missed his eye. It mirrored Anakin's scar. Luke got back up and swung at Mara, but she parried and a strike swung back. Luke barely blocked it and fell to the ground. If Luke wasn't possessed, this competition would be much more of a competition, but the possession placed on him was meant to either get him killed or allow him to become a tool for Plagueis. See, the Sith Lord wasn't going to take another student on. He knew that if Luke died, then all the information would die with him. It's the same case for what would have happened had he been able to be a victor in this competition. Plagueis would have just killed him anyways. Luke lunged from the floor and dragged his blade through the dirt, swinging violently at Mara. She was quick on her feet to move out of the way as she tripped Luke and used the Force to pull his lightsaber from his hands. Ahsoka caught Luke from hitting the ground, grabbing a hold of his head and wrapping her arms around it lightly. Ahsoka began speaking to Luke, using an ancient Jedi limerick, and then repeating the phrase multiple times. As she did, Luke slowly came out. He got a few words out, saying Coruscant Industrial Sector before fading into his sleep. Ahsoka lowered Luke to the ground, telling Mara to keep an eye on him. And while she did, Ahsoka would contact Anakin Skywalker and tell him to go to the Industrial Sector of Coruscant. Of course, Ahsoka could contact the Jedi, but she knew that Anakin would likely get there faster. With an extra 22 years of Force training, Anakin would be able to lock on to the layer. The only reason he was able to lock onto it now, rather than before, is that Plagueis, while on Coruscant, actively hid his essence, and because neither the Jedi or Skywalker were searching for darkness, they never led themselves into the Industrial Sector. The Industrial Sector had been hidden for more than 40 years, used by Palpatine and then by Plagueis. It was pretty safe no matter what was going on in the galaxy, but now that Anakin had a reason to look for the darkness here on Coruscant, he immediately left his apartment. Plagueis arrived in his lair. He told his minions to prepare his samples, while he prepared himself for the creation process. Plagueis had to have intense and immaculate focus during this process of creating a being with the Force, so he moved into his personal room surrounded by Sith artifacts and closed his eyes. A few hours later, he would walk out and he heard the sound of running water. Odd, but maybe it was just a leak. As he rounded the corner, he looked into the tube room, where he saw a shadow standing quietly. On the ground, there were minions slayed, but not with a lightsaber, with the Force. How did he not hear this? Anakin had actually gotten here before Plagueis even arrived in the building, and he stepped forward.
Hello, Dark Lord. Are you ready to meet your fate?
I don't fear you, Skywalker. I will kill you.
I'd like to see you try.
Plagueis shot lightning at Anakin, and Skywalker just walked through the lightning, stepping over the bodies of the minions, and then reached out with his metal hand and wrapped it around Plagueis' throat. The Sith Lord continued to pour lightning on the Skywalker as he was lifted off of his feet, but it had no effect. Anakin simply smiled as he twisted his wrist ever so slightly, and Plagueis' body went limp. Anakin threw the body and laughed to himself, not even a real challenge. On the forest world of Kashyyyk, Luke woke up and looked directly into the eyes of Mara Jade. She looked down at him and smiled, saying,
"Rise and shine, sandboy."
What happened, Mara?
Well, you were possessed. Your aunt saved you, and I've been waiting for you to wake up. Also, your dad brought balance to the Force again.
Oh, well, thank you. How about we head back to Coruscant, and I thank you for your efforts.
Mara raised an eyebrow and then helped Luke up. She knew what that was, an offer for a net on the town on Coruscant. Irresistible. So, of course, she would decide that she would give Sky Guy Jr. a chance. Anakin would set explosives inside the Sith lair and demolish it forever, extinguishing the era of Sith and removing them from ever having a chance at returning. Luke and Mara would return, and it would eventually lead to Mara following in Anakin's footsteps, leaving the Order for love. Leia, on the other hand, would have no issue bonding with a wealthy politician on Coruscant, while the legacy of Skywalker would continue far beyond using the Force, but contributing to the greater society of the galaxy. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is our story. Again, special thanks to Bedro Wells, Tigerboard, Darth Revan, Pimp Daddy Bane, Darth Cheesy, Apollo, Mad Mary Studios, Anakin 003, Lemon Knight, Flynn Benzies, and Lord Deadwing for supporting the channel. Hit 2,000 likes on this video, because something is coming next. If you want to see a what if, you know all the things, write them down below. Otherwise, let's talk about this story. Alright, so this is one of two stories that have gotten a lot of requests for a part 2, and I decided that I would do a part 2 for both of them. One of them is a video that is a couple months old, but it's the most requested part 2 video I have, and I'm not going to tell you what it is yet. I'm sure you guys will figure it out. But you guys are geniuses, you know that. And so this one was one that was more recent, and I'm not going to lie, this was probably one of the more challenging videos I had to write. Because there's so much going on. And so the challenge of this video was first of all connecting the dots back to the first video, because I think I mentioned this before, but typically what happens is I write a video and I completely move on from it. So I write a video and then I like get ready for the next one, and that's kind of just my schedule. So like I don't typically, if you go on Twitch or any of the other things like podcast Twitch, whatever it is, you you know that when I do a video, I typically write a video and then I get ready for the next video. So I don't really have time to like sit in the video that I wrote, and so most of the time I just kind of forget about the video. So for me, I had to kind of go back and start over with this process and be like, all right, where'd the video go? Where's all this stuff? And so, you know, I didn't want Han and Leia getting together. It's not that I don't like their relationship. It doesn't make sense in this story for them to be together. It just doesn't. I mean, I'm sure you could do like a whole video about, you know, Solo, a Star Wars Penti Patrol story, you know, and do that whole thing. But I'm not going to do that, I assure you. But, you know, Han Solo growing up on Corellia and not really leaving Corellia and like making a life for himself on Corellia. That's kind of the whole thing that goes on there. And then for, you know, the villain, that was the fun part. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I've been trying to figure out how I was gonna do this video for about a week, and that's while writing other videos. And so Plagueis came out of nowhere. I don't know where Plagueis came from, but I wanted to make a point, and I made a point through what Plagueis said in dialect during the video, and that's that Plagueis, I'm suggesting that Plagueis survived his attack by Palpatine and then went back to his lair, and then Palpatine like held him in captive and killed him in canon. That's what I'm suggesting happened. And then, so that's like excusing the fact that, you know, Plagueis like lives in the situation. So it makes it so that Plagueis doesn't actually exist in the canon timeline except to Sidious, where he just takes advantage of him and basically like learns everything he can from him just to kill him. And then in this one, he just avoids Palpatine and waits him out. And that's kind of the big difference. So it's a little bit of the two timeline thing, I'm not gonna lie, screwed with me a lot. It screwed with me a lot. That was the biggest challenge of this. The two timeline thing really messed with me. But I really tried to stay continuous to the timeline, to the timelines that I created. But anyways, I hope you all enjoyed. This was a challenge. I'm not gonna lie, it was a challenge to write this part too. But I really hope you all enjoyed. Full movie will come out at some point. I don't know when, but you know, the full movie will come out at some point. Anyways, I love you all. Spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.